In this video, we're going to look at an example of discourse using one of the texts from the unit. We're going to use Ruined Maid by Thomas Hardy and do some discourse analysis to show how these terms can be used with a literary text. It is basically a dramatic dialogue between two characters, Amelia, who is noted in the first stanza there, and a friend of hers from the past who she's run into in town. And we get that in line 2, who could have supposed I should meet you in town. And we get the sense that between the time that these girls last met and now, Amelia has changed. And we get that from a series of contrasts that her friend from the country uses, and her amazement and astonishment at all of the changes in Amelia. For example, here, you used to call home life a hag-ridden dream. You'd sigh and you'd sock, but at present you seem to know nothing of megrims or melancholy. In each of these cases, so we see that Amelia is dressed better, she's wearing jewelry, she speaks better even. The changes have been for the better from Amelia's point of view. And the friend that she's talking to by the end of the poem wishes that she could be like Amelia. I wish I had feathers, a fine sweeping gown, and a delicate face, and could strut about town. Now in each stanza, there's this almost refrain about being ruined, right? And that's sort of the answer to each of the questions or moments of astonishment by her friend. Amelia comes back with something about being ruined. Oh, didn't you know I'd been ruined? Yes, that's how we dress when we're ruined. So that's what's basically going on in this poem. First of all, let's identify some elements of the poem, make sure we understand all the meaning in the poem. So we have these terms that I have highlighted here: thee, thou, thicun, the asun, t'other. These are words that are talking about how Amelia used to speak. It's enacting some dialect, and in this case, it would be a lower class dialect in England. So if we're not totally familiar with that, the thee and thou might give us a good clue. But we can also use the words that we're not familiar with. So spudding up docks, Barton, migrams, and sock. We know the word sock, but it seems to be used in a different way than we're familiar with. You'd sigh and you'd sock. So these are words that are culturally distant from us or distant from us in time, right? We know the timing of the poem is 1866. It was written in the past. So words like these we're not really familiar with. Now, if you're using a good critical edition of the poem, like in our textbook, it's easy to figure out what all of these terms are about because it's there for you in the notes. For example, here, spudding up docks means spading up weeds. Barton is a farmyard. Sock is to sigh. And again, it tells us right here English dialect. So if we had any doubts about it at this point, we know for sure we're talking about an English poem rather than an American poem. And migrams, migraine, headache. If you have a good edition, you can use the notes in that edition to help understand terms you don't know. Otherwise, you have to look them up, and we're going to talk in just a second about a good resource for looking up terms we don't know. Now, we're still faced with this issue, the idea of ruined. So notice ruined was not glossed in our textbook. It's a word that we know, but it seems to have a pretty specific meaning in this poem. And like I said, it acts as a refrain. Oh, didn't you know I'd been ruined? Yes, that's how we dress when we're ruined. Some polish is gained with one's ruin. We never do work when we're ruined. True, one's pretty lively when ruined. You cannot quite expect that. You ain't ruined. It seems to be something good if we just take the overt meaning in the poem, and certainly by the end of the poem, the country girl is wishing that she was like Amelia. Wishing, in essence, that she was ruined too. We need to do a little more detective work to figure out what's going on with this word. If we look it up in a standard dictionary, we're going to get our standard definition. That's not going to help us. So instead, we're going to look at another resource, the OED, or Oxford English Dictionary. This is a database. It's available through the Lord's Library databases, and I'll show you how to get there in just a second. This is a diachronic dictionary. Basically, that means that it's a dictionary that shows how the meaning of a word has changed over time. So that's pretty cool. It shows different words and what they meant, say, in the 1400s versus what they meant in the 1800s versus what it means today. So that's what we need. We need a dictionary that can help us understand the meaning of the word ruined as it would have been understood in the mid-19th century. I'm at the library homepage on the Lourdes University website, and I'm just going to click on library databases, and then we're going to go to O, and we're going to scroll till we find Oxford English Dictionary, and we're going to click on that. And it will, now if you're off campus, it's going to prompt you to sign in, and you sign in with your normal Lourdes identification credentials. Here we're in, and this is what the interface of the dictionary looks like. We want to find a word in the dictionary. Now I'm using the root. Obviously it's ruined in the poem, but we want to always, when we're looking up things in the dictionary, we want to take it to the simplest root of the word. So not the past participle ruined, but just the plain old term ruin. We have two possibilities here, a noun or a verb. Let's go ahead and take a look at the noun. And let me show you how this dictionary works. So we have the etymology here. That shows us where the word came from. For example, here in Middle English, this word was originally spelled in this way. And you can see all these different spellings, and like there's a bunch of different spellings. And it goes all the way to the current version, ruin, and it's been that way since the 17th century. So that's pretty cool that we know that. The etymology is here, and it talks about where it came from. So Anglo-Norman, Middle French, and then how some of the meanings may have come in from some different French sources. There's a lot of historical information. Now, for our current purposes, we don't necessarily need to know about the alternate spellings or the etymologies, but that's just interesting, and it's just another element in this dictionary that I wanted to make you aware of. Now, what we want to do is find a meaning that seems to fit what's going on in our poem. So we have the first one we have here is condition of a fabric or structure. That's not going to be the one we want, because we want something that has to do with people. This one seems a little closer. The state or condition of a person who or society which has suffered decay or downfall, a person reduced to abject poverty. Now that's where this one goes off the rails, because clearly Amelia is not in abject poverty. She's doing much better. So that's not really right, but it's closer. We may be on the right track here. And then we get a few more: ruinous, destruction, downfall. Okay. Person falling to the ground or from a height. No, that's not right. This one is, again, similar: downfall or decay of a person in society. But again, this idea of complete loss of resources or wealth, that doesn't quite fit. But here, now this one may be what we're looking for. Dishonor of a woman caused by her seduction and subsequent abandonment, degradation resulting from this. And it notes that this meaning is now chiefly historical. I think this is the one that we're looking for. So notice this usage. The earliest instance that the OED has identified of this usage is from 1567. It definitely would have been current in the mid-19th century. There's a couple of examples from that time period. So it would have definitely been a meaning of the word that would have existed at the time of Hardy's poem. And in fact, as we're going to see, it's related to a dominant discourse at the time of Hardy's poem. So notice, let's take a look at these two 19th century examples, one from Dickens and one from a nonfiction text by Logan. Wretched marriages don't come of such things in our degree, only wretchedness and ruin. Every opportunity is taken to familiarize her with the taste of drink and to induce a giddy and thoughtless state of mind. At length, the hour of her ruin is fixed. Okay, so in both of these cases, basically what this comes down to is a woman who has sex, isn't married, and then becomes ruined, right? The idea is that ruins her. And that ruin means nobody's going to want to marry her after that. when we take into account the historical context and the meaning of the word ruin that we just learned about, and we go back and look at the poem, and we see now that Amelia, since she left the farm, has come into a lot of money and has jewels and fine clothes, and talks about being lively and not doing work, meaning the kind of farm work that the farm girl does, and gaining some polish with her ruin, it's pretty easy to guess that the ruined maid is actually a prostitute, and that's how she's supporting herself. Now we understand the meaning. So let's do some discourse analysis. Remember the steps. We want to identify the topic, identify the discourse community, determine the type or types of discourse that are being shown. We want to think about the specific framing, and then we want to explain the significance of the representation. In this case, let's identify the topic. Certainly has to do with women's work, women supporting themselves, and prostitution. The discourse community is the mid-19th century reading public in England. Let's determine the types of discourse. So we have a dominant discourse. Prostitution is bad, right? So that would be the dominant discourse in the surrounding culture, is that, and I'm saying it in a very simple way, but it means a few different things. Prostitution would have been seen as morally reprehensible. Women who engaged in that kind of behavior would have had no social standing, no reputation, and they would have been thought of as morally degenerate in the period. So it was a very, very negative view of prostitution in this period specifically. But this poem suggests a subversive discourse, that there are lots of benefits to prostitution, especially when compared to honest work, and honest work is obviously represented by the farm girl and the type of work that she does. Let's take a look at that specific framing, like I was talking about. For example, talking about the fair garments and prosperity, and that is aligned with being ruined. When it talks about, you left us in tatters without shoes or socks, digging potatoes, spudding up docks, which we know now is pulling up weeds. That's the kind of honest work that she had been doing, and it sounds like very hard work. And over here, talking about your hands were like paws, your face blue and bleak. You used to call home life a hag-ridden dream. All of these memories of how Amelia used to be are how we can understand what that honest work of working on the farm was like. It was very hard on women. It was hard physical labor, and it didn't pay a lot. They don't have a high standard of living, it seems pretty clear, not to mention, medical issues. And now, as she's, working in a very different kind of job, she has bracelets and feathers. She speaks like a lady. She wears gloves, right? She has a fine sweeping gown and a delicate face. And by the end, the farm girl is actually envious of Amelia. So this would run absolutely counter to the dominant expectation. That dominant idea that prostitution is terrible and it's this moral bankruptcy, and just anyone who does it would be completely excised from any decent society. And yet, even with all that, the farm girl is looking at Amelia's benefits that she's getting from this line of work and wishing for that. So it's both condemning the types of available work for women that leave them in this utter poverty and with this very hard life, and suggesting that, look, in comparison to that, you can't really complain if women become prostitutes, because boy, that sure looks a lot better. It's also showing that the ruined maid herself, she doesn't seem ashamed of what she does. She doesn't seem to feel like she's in some kind of, moral quandary. She's looking at the benefits that she's getting from that, and she seems perfectly proud of her life. I mean, even when she says, some polish is gained, she's kind of bragging. One's pretty lively when ruined. So she also is not behaving the way that would have been expected in this cultural period, right? The expectation would have been that she would, hang her head low and not even want to talk to this friend she used to know, but none of that, right? She is essentially bragging about her current standard of living. The way the text basically goes about framing this issue is through this contrast between the farm girl doing this hard labor and Amelia, who now looks like a lady and the comparison between the two is one of the main things that generates the criticism as well as the meaning in the poem. And as we get into Unit 2, you'll talk about terms like antithesis that will help us further analyze this type of framing. But we certainly can see the comparison between the two and the conversation between the two are some of the main strategies that are used in this poem to achieve the effects of critiquing the available opportunities for women and undermining the notion that all prostitutes are sort of moral reprobates who are totally ashamed of what they do and are miserable. Amelia doesn't seem to be very miserable. We've done the first three as we analyze the specific framing. That's the one we just completed. So thinking about how the details of the representation of Amelia past and Amelia present, and the contrast between those two are the ways in which prostitution is being framed as a really financially beneficial thing that increases someone's quality of life, and how the country girl is increasingly jealous of her friend over the course of the poem. And so the significance of the representation, that's the piece where we can see this as a challenge to contemporary ideas about the type of work that women should do to be respectable, and the value of that respectability compared with the financial poverty that respectable women face. The idea that, prostitution is so wrong in this poem is challenged by the notion that, hey, then maybe we should give women something to do that's respectable, but also pays them a decent living wage. So we can see a lot of really interesting cultural arguments that are being promoted in this poem through the subversive discourse of the representation of Amelia.